It's a pleasure to be here in Millmerran again and to open up the Word and share with you a little bit about me. Last time I realised I didn't really say much about me, and I know some people like it when the preacher says a little bit about who they are, what they do, and I guess that sort of adds a little credibility. And I didn't say very much other than I'd been over to the Bible lands and been there to Jerusalem. We talked about the life of Jesus when I was here at Easter time. But today, I'm going to reflect a little bit on something I deal with on a daily basis. And I know we all, looking at the title there, Tribulations, A Pathway to Hope, we all have tribulations in life, don't we? We all have troubles and challenges. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But what is a tribulations, or what are tribulations? And if you do a quick Google search, it'll give you these couple of words: great trouble, severe suffering, or trying personal experiences. Do we all relate to those? I think we do. I don't claim to be someone who's had tremendous challenges in my life, but I know that there are moments and even days in recent times when things seem to be good on the outside. On the inside, sometimes we can be going through some trying, troubling personal experiences, tribulations of personal nature, not just in the physical world, but also up here. And we have that epidemic of COVID in recent years that's really given a rise to mental health. And so we see these things on a daily basis. A little bit about me. For the last 13 years or so, I've been working with young people in various different capacities. I worked with Barry when I was doing school chaplaincy in the Lockyer Valley for a few years, about 7 years, and then ended up doing some residential youth work. I did also do a short stint out at Carolundy as the chaplain out there in Western Australia. Anyone know where that is? Some of you? Yeah? Just put your finger in the middle of WA, that's where it is, in the middle of the desert. That was quite an experience. But some of the most challenging things that I've seen and heard and had walked with young people in is the residential homes. So the group homes, the homes where child safety removes a child because they're in an unsafe situation and then puts them into a home with a bunch of adults who are trained and qualified and working with the kids 24/7. It's a challenging experience, and you see a lot of stuff going on there. But what I'd like to share with you is this verse here, going too fast. Romans 5, and if you particularly focus on 3 to 4, it says, "But we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." Not easy always to feel that way in the moment, but if we depend on God enough and have that faith of a mustard seed, we can develop perseverance, character, and hope. And I'm hoping through our exploration today that we can realise that these tribulations are an opportunity for character and hope. So let me begin. So, in brief, I mentioned before that I'd worked in residential youth work, and you see a lot of terrible things happening, and it's more to do with their mind, isn't it? Where their thoughts are when the challenges hit. And because they're in a safe environment in that moment that you're working with them in a house, but they remember all these things that have happened. And sometimes things can happen when they go to visit their family, to visit people, and these things just keep coming back up. I remember a 15-year-old boy throwing knives at me because I was simply there trying to get his girlfriend out of the house because she wasn't allowed there. I remember a 16-year-old telling me about how she'd been taking intravenous drugs and she had the scars up on her arm, and she's telling me all about it. I remember a 10-year-old boy who watched his father choke to death I remember a 14-year-old boy spending nights in Brisbane streets, glue sniffing and chroming, coming back to the house only to have a shower and a meal and a bit of sleep, and then off he'd go again for a few more days. I remember 2 girls, 13 and 17, trying to run in front of the road into oncoming traffic because they felt they had nothing to live for. I remember seeing and feeling like the devil himself was yelling at me through a 16-year-old boy who had cigarette butts all over his floor and playing violent video games on his gaming console. I remember many others disclosing physical, sexual abuse and neglect from people in their lives who should have been there to protect them and not harm them. I remember a 12-year-old boy who could not sleep because he was seeing his grandmother as a ghost at the end of his bed at night. I did work with that boy a little bit and explored the Bible, and we were able, he came back a little while later saying that the ghost had gone because we talked about death and the meaning, what actually happens when you die, and spiritual apparitions. That's when I was doing chaplaincy a few years ago. But all of us, at one time or another, have or will have tribulations. Many in our world are so negatively influenced by these tribulations and troubles and the sufferings and trying personal experiences. These can shape us to feel quite depressed and distant from God. But instead of blaming God and running from God, we should run to Him, not away from Him. Go towards God when things get tough and challenging. We're all influenced by friends, work, media, and they carry the message that God does not care or that He doesn't even exist. So why should we live the way we want? So we should just live the way we want, irrespective of God, because He doesn't exist. I'd like to challenge those narratives. Reaching out and spending time with God can change everything during tribulations. Check this out. So Fox News just a couple of days ago posted this up, and it said they did some study in a hospital, and they found that people who spent just a little bit of time, 5 minutes in prayer, had a great reduction in their pain and anxiety in hospital.
Amen.
Isn't that amazing? It's like and we see this all the time, that new research and new studies, they all confirm what the Bible has always told us. The power of prayer, yes, but it's God who's doing the work, isn't it? When we open up when we say a prayer, we're opening up and allowing God to work through us. Another study showed the power of 4. Who's heard of this one? They did a study on people who read the Bible a certain number of days a week, based on happiness and life quality and all that kind of thing. And they said twice a week nearly had no difference. And they said 3 times a week had some slight improvements, but when you read the Bible 4 times a week, you see some drastic changes. Feeling lonely decreased by 30%. Anger issues decreased by 32%. Bitterness in relationships decreased by 40%. Alcoholism plummeted by 57%. Viewing pornography decreased by 61%. Feeling spiritually stagnant, obviously, decreased by 61%. Giving good testimony increased by 200%. And leading people to Christ increased by 230%. And there's more in it, but that's just like the highlights. 4+ days a week reading your Bible. And I haven't read in terrible depth of this study, but who knows, that could just be 5 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour every day. It's just reading your Bible every day. That's the blanket. Satan wants you to experience tribulations. John 10:10 says that the thief being Satan, does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. But the contrast is this, is that I, being Jesus, have come that they may have life and they may have it more abundantly. Let's talk about Joseph. You find the story of Joseph in Genesis 37 to 50, and it tells us the story of a favoured son. And there's quite a lot written about him, actually. And if you were to rank the top number of chapters attributed to a character in the Bible, he comes out number 4. Did you know that? He comes out at number 4. Guess who's number 1?
Jesus.
No. Moses, yes. 120 chapters. That's because there's Deuteronomy and Exodus and Leviticus. There's all references to Moses, so it's all about Moses. So much about Moses. Jesus has 89 chapters. David, King David, shepherd boy David, had 66 chapters, and Joseph has 14. Not quite as many, but still number 4. And his name is mentioned 246 times through the Bible. So I think there's some value in having a look at Joseph's life and applying what we can to our own lives. And if you know the story, I'll highlight, I guess, the tribulations of Joseph. He survived a murder plot. Who's survived a murder plot? Almost. I know I've got some staff members who don't want me in my position, but that's okay. It's a workplace murder, but not really a murder, right? It doesn't compare. It doesn't compare. He was thrown in a pit. Who's been thrown in a pit? No. I've been in some caves with some pathfinders, but it's not a pit. Being sold into slavery. Hopefully no one's had that experience. He was forced migration to Egypt. He suffered false accusation of an attempted rape by Potiphar's vengeful wife. He endured wrongful imprisonment for a crime he didn't commit. He experienced painful betrayal, neglect, when the cupbearer forgot about him for 2 years. Remember, he interpreted the dream and he just forgotten about for 2 years. Navigating sudden psychological whiplash. There's a bit of a word there for you. He was a prisoner, and then all of a sudden he became the second in command of all of Egypt. And then he was managing a catastrophic 7-year famine, not just for Egypt, but helping the nations around as well. And then he confronted deep emotional pain and trauma through his brothers who came decades later, and he had to work with them. But he was pretty good about it, as we know. Did you know that the Bible does not record any fault in Joseph? Despite all of those challenges that he had, those tribulations, he did not have a recorded fault. Now, he's human. He probably would have done some little things here and there, but nothing recorded worthy in the Bible. Not like Moses, who struck the rock instead of spoke to it, or not like Noah, who got drunk after the flood. Not like some of the other Bible characters we know, like Peter, who denied Christ. But Joseph, like a type of Christ, saved the then known world, and Jesus will save us in the hope to come. But let's look at how can we recognise that Joseph actually had a connection with God? If we're going to go back to the verse in Romans that we have a connection with God, and that's what's going to develop the hope out of the tribulations, how are we going to see that? Let's have a look. So Genesis 37:3. Now Israel, being Jacob, his father, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. He also made him a tunic of many colours. We know that. But what does this mean? What depth can we gather from looking at this verse? I think we can see that Joseph spent intimate time with his father. Would you agree? He's the favourite. He got he didn't have to go out and work, so where would he be? He'd be there at the tent with his father while his other brothers are out working the field. So he would have spent some long amount of time. And how was tradition and the stories of Genesis passed through? Through oral tradition and stories. And so Joseph would have learned all these things from Jacob. About God, about creation, about everything God had done in human history until that point. When Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife, he said this, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He knew it, and he was outspoken about it in his everyday interactions with other people. And when Pharaoh was questioning Joseph, he answered Pharaoh saying, "It is not me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace," when Pharaoh had the dream that he needed interpreted. He gave credit to God. Not me, it's God. And then in Genesis 41:25, and Joseph said to Pharaoh again, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do." God has shown what God is about to do, giving all credit, dominion, and power of the world, not to Pharaoh, above Pharaoh. Pharaoh could have had him killed for saying something like that. Back in Genesis 40, and they said to him, we each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. When Joseph was in prison, so Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." He gave credit, even in the prison when it probably didn't matter to him. He could have taken some credit, and then maybe he would have made it out of the prison a little bit faster. Who knows? But he gave the credit to God. Genesis 45, "But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you have sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." His brothers came years later, after all the tribulation he'd been through, and then the ascension to second in command of all of Egypt. The 7-year famine was happening, and he says this. He could have easily just said, "Behead them all." His brothers who had thrown him in a pit sold him as a slave. But he didn't. He showed the grace of God, didn't he? He had the hope of something greater through this tribulation. In Genesis 50, verse 20, it says, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people alive." And that's why Joseph is attributed characteristics of Christ. Like, we can't see a fault about him. Jesus didn't have a fault about him when he was on earth. No faults, no sins. And yet, Joseph came, he became a ruler, and he saved many, many people's lives by giving them physical bread or physical food. And Jesus came to give us spiritual food that we might live eternally. Some people go, "Well, how do you know Joseph is real?" Well, I'm going to show you something. I like to do show and tell. So, you see up on the screen there, this is the Beni Hassan, or it's found in a place called Beni Hassan on a tomb, and they reckon this is a depiction of the Hebrews coming into Egypt. Do you see that the colours and the clothes that they're wearing, it's not really Egyptian style. It's not just the little white skirt thing and usually no shirt, and they've got, their faces are clean shaven. But here we've got people with beards, we've got what appears to be some children, we've got women, and they're carrying all sorts of stuff. I mean, look at that guy, I think he's got his TV. Like, they're moving in, right? Does it look like that? So, anyway, this is what I wanted to show you, and you can have a look at it later. It's this is from Egypt. It's written, or it's drawn on actual Egyptian papyrus and it's just that same mural. But it's like these little evidences really point towards what? The truth of the Bible. And so we can have that hope. And the other interesting thing, if you zoom in on this guy in the mural, what's his coat look like? How many different colours on there? So who knows? This could have been that could have been Jacob on that donkey there going into Egypt with a coat of many colours, symbolic of Joseph. That's what some people believe anyway. No conclusive proof, but it's very interesting. If we were to touch a little on Moses, we did a little bit this morning in the Sabbath school, we find that there are similarities. He also had a lot of challenges, but what I really want to focus on is his mountaintop experience. But we know that he had to flee for his life. We know that he had to overcome severe doubt. He didn't even have confidence in himself. He had to get Aaron, his brother, to be the spokesperson in front of Pharaoh. He had to have that burning bush experience to turn him around and go back to Egypt. He had to face Pharaoh's fierce resistance more than a couple of times with 10 different plagues. You'd think he'd give up after one or two. He led millions of panicking people to the Red Sea. That would have been pretty daunting. I don't know what I would have done. You're responsible for millions of people. You've come through the wilderness going, yep, we're going to go to the promised land, and all of a sudden you're met with ocean. These guys can't swim. Not across that anyway. But God did something amazing, didn't he? He coped with heartbreak when his brother Aaron and Miriam turned against his own leadership. And he interceded repeatedly for the nation with God. How many pleading prayers do you think he did? So many. And he carried the crushing psychological weight of managing endless disputes and complaints of the entire nation. And he had a 40-year delay going into the promised land. He didn't even get to go. But the most interesting thing I think that happened to him is that when he was up on Mount Sinai and he came down, towards the end of that chapter 34 we had a touch on this morning, his face was glowing. Why was it glowing? Because he had spent time with God. He'd spent time with God. And his face was glowing so much after speaking to the people, he had to put a veil on his face. It was glowing that much. Have a look at it, the last part of chapter 34, Genesis. When you get to the peak, to get to the peak, you must climb the mountain. I want to tell you a little bit of a story. I was once a Pathfinder director years ago when I did theology at Avondale, and part of being at Avondale you get placed at a church, and they needed someone to run their Pathfinder club, and they got me to do it. I don't know why I was doing it, but anyway. I planned this hike in the Wadigan Mountains and looked at the topography of the place, and I went, yep, I think we'll go here and we'll go there and we'll climb up there and we'll camp here and then we'll hike back out and get picked up and the weekend's over. So all the planning went in and we went to go, and we spent the first night, Friday night. That was all fine, no worries. And then the second day we hiked all day, we did a bit of a church service part way through, and then we got towards sunset and we're like, yep, we'll just go around here up the ridge and we'll camp at the top and that'll be great. Except when we got to the bottom of the ridge, I thought it was going to be a bit more like this. It looked more like that. More like this. And as much as that's a bit embarrassing, we had to do something about it. We couldn't really camp at the bottom. The problem with camping at the bottom is that it was too rough. There wasn't really any flat spots we could camp, but I knew the top was flat. We could camp at the top, but we had to push through. And so we made a decision, looking at the map again, that we had to go around the face of the cliff, on the side of the ridge, and where the topography of the map sort of tapered out, we could just sort of climb up. It would be a lot less of a steep slope or a sheer cliff. And so we decided to do that. We turned our torches on, because just as I said, we were getting right on sunset, and off we went. And as we started, we realised this bush was, no one had ever walked through here before probably. It was really dense, really thick, lots of trees, and the ground was going like this. And so we were like mountain goats on the side of a mountain. And we went single file, we called out numbers. I think there was 15 of us in total, so we called out numbers 1, 2, 3, went up to 15 every now and again to make sure we hadn't lost anyone. Because with the torches, it was pitch black. We only had a little bit of light that we could see a little bit in front of us, so we were a bit worried. And it was hot, and it was sweaty, and it was dirty, and you got all the leaves in your face. It was a challenge. We went about 300 metres around through this thick scrub, and it took us about 3 hours. It was quite challenging. We finally made it to the top, among the long grass, and there was a couple of tall trees up there as well, and we pitched our tents, and exhausted we fell asleep. But then the morning came. We woke up to the sounds of birds. We unzipped our tents. We climbed out with our bleary eyes, with the bright sun, and saw a much better sunrise than this picture shows. A sunrise in the valley, and it was just amazing. It was peaceful. And we knew that the tribulation, or the trouble that we have gone through to wake up on that mountaintop, was worth the trouble. That pathway created character in many of the group, many of the kids who went through that challenge, and hope that, yes, we would see this amazing sunrise from the top of the mountain. And a verse that I feel sort of resonates with this, Psalms 30 verse 5, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And I think we can we resonate with that with our lives today? Can we resonate with the daily challenges that we have? This is only but a short time period, this life we have on earth. We know that hope is coming in the morning, that great resurrection morning when Jesus comes. A quick story about James, the son of Zebedee. James was a martyr. He was also a disciple of Jesus. And he was so confident. He had extraordinary courage and was killed for the testimony of what he said he had seen with his own 2 eyes. The death and resurrection of Christ. The accusation from a Roman guard convicted him to death. But as he was being led to the place of execution, the guard who had accused him was converted. And he too was executed at that same place. The tribulation that gave character and hope. Can we display such courage and confidence and steadfast joy in Jesus to make a conversion in someone else? James' tribulation was a pathway to hope. He had the hope. That's why he was happy and smiling. As the tradition tells us, he was not fearful of death. He had the hope. Now, there's no promise of an easy life. This also makes me think about Psalms 23, where it says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Through the valley of the shadow of death. David wrote this. David, who was a shepherd boy, became king. He wrote this probably towards, in his kingship years. reflecting on his life, realising that he had gone through some dark valleys. And it's hard for us who may not have had too many dark valleys to look back and reflect, knowing that God will be with you. But for someone who had gone through many things, David is promising you today that God will be with you, not to fear evil, though you might be walking through the valley of the shadow of death, or less. Sometimes we think our little troubles are not worth God's bothering, but I think they are. God cares so much for us. And in Matthew 28:20, Jesus says this to his disciples before he leaves. He says, I am with you always. Not I am with you when you go to church. Not I am with you when you're being good. Not I am with you when you're witnessing to someone or preaching on a street corner. I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. Imagine if when we had our tribulations that we would turn to God rather than anywhere else and be a little bit like Joseph, displaying such character as him. Where do we often turn when we have problems and we need answers? I know in this technological age we are challenged or given such information at our fingertips, aren't we? With the rise of internet and mobile phones. But imagine this. Imagine, what if we picked up our Bibles as much as our mobile phones? What if we panicked when we left our Bible at home, turning the car around because we felt completely disconnected without it? What if it was the very first thing we reached for in the morning? What if it slipped out of our pockets during an awkward silence? An elevator ride, so we were waiting in line at the grocery store, we pulled it out and used it. What if the soft rustle of turning pages replaced the mindless scrolling of thumbs on a crowded commuter train? What if we spent hours deeply absorbing its truths rather than consuming endless feeds of temporary news and temporary social updates? What if kids saw their parents staring into their living word of God just as intently as they currently look at their glowing screens? What if we reacted to every life crisis by immediately opening Scripture to see what God has to say, rather than texting a friend or searching the internet for answers? What if our collective attention shifted so dramatically that anxiety, comparison, and online bitterness simply starved to death from lack of attention? What if this changed how we approach tribulations, troubles and suffering in our lives? How could this change your life? What's stopping you from having this change now? Romans 5:3-4, we said at the beginning, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. The only way that we can develop those things is by reading the instruction manual of faith. The challenge is this: hold on to God through the troubles, because God is bigger than our troubles. He is bigger than the problems that we face, the tribulations that we face. Can we be like Joseph? Can we be like Moses? Can we be like James, the son of Zebedee, testifying of the one true Christ? Can we be like Jesus, who prayed so earnestly every morning and spent time with the Creator daily? Will you allow tribulations to destroy you, or will you allow them to drive you closer to the one who will see you through? Will tribulation be your pathway to hope?